Good afternoon and welcome. My name is Jeannie Dotson, and I'm the marketing manager at the Storage Group. Thank you for taking the time to join us for this very important webinar. We encourage you to stay to the very end because we do have two great offers for you. If you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat and we'll get to as many as we can. Let's get started. Today, the Storage Group and Storage Lease Now are happy to host the webinar, Legal Landmines After a Disaster, What Every Self-Storage Owner Should Know. We have a great panel of experts here for you. First, we have Scott Zucker, founding partner of Self Storage Legal Network. We have Stacy Maxwell, Director of Insurance at Secure Lease. And we have Terry Campbell, Commercial Insurance Business Development and Risk Advisor for Self Storage. Welcome to all of you and welcome to all of the attendees. Scott, I'm going to let you take it away.
So again, Terry and Stacy, thanks for joining me today.
Sure, glad to be here.
Thanks for having us.
So let's start out with just from the beginning. And I thought maybe we'd pace ourselves through the scenario of what may happen if you get a fire, a flood, or other catastrophic impact to your buildings as a self-storage operator. What is the immediate action you should take as an operator? And I'm going to first turn to Stacy because she's done a lot of homework on this and it is really instrumental in understanding this process. There's really some quick first steps of the how-tos once a disaster may strike. So give us your thoughts on that.
Well, sure. First of all, when disaster strikes, you're going to call 911. First thing you do is seek help from first responders who can come and put out flames or, help injured people, whatever the case may be. You want to evacuate your staff and any tenants that may be on site as soon as possible, get them out of the way, get them out of harm's way, and then secure the property and make sure that people aren't, just entering the property willy-nilly, and making sure you lock things down to keep everyone secure and also to keep the contents secure inside the property as well. In some cases, you may need to shut off the utilities if it's safe to do so, like if you have flooding. Shut off electric and things like that, because that can cause even bigger problems. You want to, like I said, lock down the gate, make sure nobody can get in or out, and notify your tenants. I think that's one of the most important things you need to do. As an operator with Universal, we used to always watch the weather, and when reports came through of tropical storms and hurricanes and things approaching, we would watch those, and if it looked like it was going to impact any of our facilities, we would send out email communications and text communications to our tenant base at those potentially affected facilities, letting them know, we're going to lock down access. We don't, if the last day you can come in and have access will be on Friday because this thing's going to hit on Saturday. We want to keep everybody safe, stay off the property until conditions are safe to return, and we'll let you know. So letting those tenants know beforehand if you can in cases of weather, but in cases of fire or something that you're having to react to, letting those tenants know as soon as possible, this is what happened. We are locking down access. The affected units, tenants will be notified separately. You kind of a blanket email to everyone to let them know that, you can't come in. And then, reaching out to those tenants individually and, pulling your insured roll to see who has insurance and helping them, start their claim is really important. Reaching out to your own property insurance agent like Terry, and getting him activated on helping you, mitigate what's going on.
Yeah. And that's what I want to break it down to is I love what you're saying about the internal safety of the facility and acting to control it. I never even thought about, turning off the utilities if you're able to do so in reaction to something that happens. So I like to take this as three prongs. Let's talk about, and I'll go into the issue of communicating with your tenants. I agree with you, Stacy. The opportunity first, if you really know that a storm's coming, to notify them about that. You may have tenants that may choose to retrieve their property from the facility in lieu of leaving it at harm's way at the facility if it's in the track of the storm. But this after the impact communication, once you're back up and running, the ability to communicate with your tenants globally, and then specifically, like you mentioned, that there's been an incident at the facility, Maybe access is controlled right now because of fire marshal or safety restrictions,
Yep.
but that something has happened and you're on top of it and you're working with officials to work towards that process of access if there is such a later access, and maybe with the fire there's not. But that communication with the tenants, I will tell you from a legal liability point of view, one of the complaints we get a lot from tenants is, I didn't know. So you should have told me. I wasn't aware of this. So just what you're saying, operators now have the email addresses, they have the cell phone numbers so they can text. Communication with tenants are key.
It is.
Let me move to Terry for a second about what I might consider to be not necessarily the second phone call vis-a-vis the tenant insurance program, but equal to that, the insurance company that handles the property and casualty for the facility. So Terry, an operator calls, has coverage for their buildings. What happens then?
Okay. Well, one of the as Stacy was just saying, the first thing is making sure that there's safety. First is sort of the way you're approaching things, and that nobody's allowed, because they should ask, how's everything going when they do call the insurance company. But one of your first calls again is to the emergency management folks, to the fire department, whoever, and then as soon as practical. Sometimes it's like, oh, I got to call my insurance company. No, sometimes we're not necessarily the first call, but when you do call us, we want to hear, everything, all the details we can. We're going to tell you that we want to document. If everything's safe, nobody's there, we want to make sure that you keep it that way, that you don't let anybody on site, but we want you to document any kind of damage. Let's say, for example, there's a tree falls over a fence, or your gate gets knocked down, or whatever. It's your responsibility as the owner to keep that safe, secure. So if those things I just mentioned were to happen, you need to get those taken care of as soon as you can, because you don't want people coming into the site that shouldn't be. You don't want, not just the renters coming in to get their stuff, but looters. So you want to make sure that you're taking care of any kind of damage, protecting from further damage. Again, that's your responsibility. So if there's a hole in the roof, you need to get somebody up there and get a tarp on it. You got to do everything you can to prevent any further damage. But having said that, I will say, don't make any permanent repairs. Do something that's temporary, because if you make a permanent repair before an adjuster gets there and they see, oh, well, there's no damage here. Well, yeah, but I fixed it. Well, it doesn't matter. I don't see a damage. So don't do a permanent repair until an adjuster's been there. But you definitely want to be sure that you're protecting the site from further damage or from anyone getting on there.
Okay, so you've communicated with the property carrier that you have concerning the facility damage. Just like you said, an adjuster would be assigned to the case, and we'll talk about that stage separately. But okay, so you've made that phone call. Now let me turn to maybe, and I don't want to put these in order, the second or third phone call, but understanding that the facility either has a tenant protection plan program or a insurance program. And Stacy, your company does both, right?
We do tenant protection. Secure Lease is a tenant protection program, and then we also offer P&C coverage for the property itself.
Okay. So let's talk through the tenant protection, or if a facility has a tenant insurance program, just the communication fact. What are you telling your folks to do if they have the tenants, if they have a claim?
So with most programs, with tenant protection programs, the facility can assist the tenant in filing their claim. With tenant insurance, it's a little bit different, because the facility manager is not an agent, so they're technically not allowed to talk about it or sell it, so to speak. So they have to refer them to the insurance company. So being prepared with the information of who the tenant needs to reach out to first, I think is the most important thing. Providing that phone number if it's a tenant insurance program, which is what Universal ran for years and years and years. So when the disaster struck, the managers were instructed to call the tenants that were affected and say, I see in your rent roll that you have the coverage. I want to give you the phone number right now so that you can reach out to them and initiate your claim. If you need me to take photos, I am on site. We've got the site locked down, but I can take a photo for you if you would like and send it to you. Just whatever kind of assistance that they can provide. And that would go the same for tenant protection as well. With tenant protection, we do have the ability to initiate the claim form for them and start filling that out for them and providing, the documentation that they need. So they, even with insurance claim, whether either tenant protection or insurance, they're all going to need documentation from the facility. You're going to need your rental agreement. You're going to need your signed addendum saying that you have the coverage. And then you're going to need your tenant ledger showing where you've paid for the coverage and the coverage is current. And that's going to be part of the claim process as well. So as a manager, being ready with that information when you call each of your tenants is the most important thing you can do to just get that ball rolling for them, because they're being notified that there has been major trauma at this facility and they're probably panicking, freaking out, and they're going to need your assurance and guidance that, look, we're going to walk you through this. It's going to be okay. And I think that's the most important thing a manager can do.
And
Yeah,
Scott,
and that's it's a big job. Yeah.
I was going to say, I was just going to add one thing is we keep using the term, call your insurance company, call whoever. You definitely want to do that, but you also want to, as soon as practical, follow up in writing. You want it in writing as well, so you've got a trail instead of just a phone call, because phone calls sometimes are forgotten. So always follow up in writing. And I know that being an attorney, you appreciate that.
I do. That writing is important. Thank God for emails. But yeah, no. Terry, it's a great suggestion, and it's true for what Stacy's saying. The ability to verify that the facility has communicated with the tenant in writing about what they need to do to pursue their claims as compared to just phone calls is important to verify that they've done their job about communicating the process for submitting the claims.
Yep. And another thing that I'm sure a lot of people do this, and I'm just going to throw it out there anyway, is, the old saying, when you fail to plan, you plan to fail. Have a plan in place ahead of time. Have that plan in place. What if it's a hurricane? What if it's a tornado? What if it's a fire? What if it's an airplane falling into the facility? I know that's a little extreme, but you want to have a plan in place. If these things happen, what are the steps? Who do I call? And what order do I call? So have a guideline, because if you've got, what's my insurance agent's number? What's my tenant insurance agent's number? You want to have all this at your steps. And I know a lot of people put this in their policies and procedures. And if not, I definitely highly recommend it.
Yeah, for sure. I do want to mention the QR code. Later on, you can download a disaster guide that I've put together to help people prepare for that. But having that not just printed copy in your office, because what if your office is affected? You want to have it stored digitally on the cloud as well, so you can access it remotely in case we had a situation years ago where a facility burnt, and it was bad. It took out the office, took out the manager's apartment, it took out everything. And so we were lucky in that we had digital files, a digital filing system, and we were able to, and with the property management software we were using, it was in the cloud. So we were able to pull those tenant records from a different site and, be able to start calling those people and get them taken care of. So
I was just going to ask that question about operators that are still maintaining hard records at their offices only, which may be subject to the same risk of damage, and then they don't have backup, whether they're pursuing a cloud-based backup system, which I think we all would recommend these days. Some sort of digital support for those. And I know that the storage group, has programs that way. It's just seems to be the natural benefit of storage of records, that they should not be limited to the facility itself, which is subject to the risk of damage in these situations.
Absolutely. Even if it's just uploading a tenant insured role and contact information to a Google Drive that's password protected. Something just as simple as that, for operators who maybe don't have the budget to have a more expensive software that is cloud-based, or, whatever the situation is, protecting yourself with a digital copy of your records is best, for sure.
And I got to thank you for the QR code support for that disaster kit that you're offering. I think that would be great reference for our listeners. All right, so let's move a little bit beyond you've reached out to your tenants about the situation, your insurance companies, both the tenant insurance or protection plan program, as well as your property and carrier coverage. Now the issue is access to the facility. And I know that's such a big struggle for operators, that tenants want to get to their stuff. They want to see what happened. They may want to retrieve their property. And the operators struggling with the safety and security of access to their customers. So I can tell you from my point of view with regard to access, no access would be provided until the local law enforcement or fire marshal authorities have cleared the facility for such access. But sometimes they're unwilling to do that. And sometimes you have to get your insurance company involved to back you up on the issue of access. So let's just talk about, when you open the door. Let's start, Terry. What's your thought about access for a tenant in a damaged property?
Well, I think there's I think different ways to look at that. It's like, is it a point where it's safe and everyone can come in? Do you allow that? Do you set up schedules so you don't have so many people trying to come in at one time? And I think there's going to be times where you have people that you want to come in and check their units, and you can't get them, and you can't find them, and eventually it's like, what am I going to do with their units, because they won't respond? So definitely making sure that everything is safe. There's no issues that anybody could get hurt before you allow them in. And I know sometimes, I've heard of cases where certain customers that maybe they have a huge amount of inventory that's worth a lot of money, and they're like, I have got to get in. I've got to get in because I have such an amount of money tied up here. And sometimes they're so insistent. I've heard of people actually making them sign a liability waiver.
That's what I was going to get to. Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't mean to steal your thunder.
No. That's great. That's true.
So, if that's the case, then hey, great. Sign the waiver and be careful. And I'd still be in there watching and make sure nothing happened to them. But usually it's like, once it's safe for everybody to go, then try to schedule them if you can. You may not always be able to, but you don't want everybody there at one time.
No, you're absolutely right about that, Terry. Letting people flood the gates, coming in, and it's just going to create traffic and a nightmare, and you already got a safety hazard situation. So in those instances, where there may have been a flood or another situation, properties, we did kind of meter out access and schedule it for them. Now, if it's water damage, if it's flood, if it's things like that, the sooner they can get in there, the better, to dry those things out, because you're going to set up a mold problem and other things, that think about that as well. So, getting a hold of tenants, and especially those that are hard to get a hold of, that's probably the toughest part.
We'll talk about that process in a separate. Again, these seems to be sort of a process reality that you go through these steps of communication, you go through these steps of getting approved access, you permit access, you encourage these tenants to come back. And I think, Stacey, you probably have this experience where you'll get many tenants who want to come back and see their stuff, maybe retrieve their property, avoid further damage by mold or mildew to their property, they remove it. But you have other tenants, and I think Terry sort of raised this already, that you can't reach and are not responsive. Now, we all know in the context of certainly of an area disaster, tornado, hurricane, flooding, that these tenants may be affected at their own homes and suffered injuries or damage that prevents them from coming to the facility. But still, as an operator, you're looking to get these units emptied out or moved so you can begin your own remediation and renovation of your building. So let's talk about that path for a minute. You're communicating with your customers, but they're not communicating back. Any suggestions or resources on that, Stacey?
Well, I think the most important thing is to keep records of every attempt of communication that you make with them, so that you can prove that you have made every effort possible to reach them. Even if what you're looking at is a pile of rubble, it still belongs to someone else. And you can't consider it abandoned until they've been made aware of the fact that it exists, and they need to acknowledge that this is their property and either come get it or say it's trash, dispose of it. So keeping record of every attempt shows you've at least tried. And then when it comes down to it and you get to the point where they still haven't come and it's basically abandoned at this point, you got to move on, because you have to, when we had that fire, we had to bulldoze the entire building. So like, you got to move on and get to get your business back up and running, rebuild. So,
Yep.
unfortunately, if they're not willing to communicate back to you, if you can't get a hold of them, the best thing you can do is just document that you did your best. So
Sounds like you've been talking to lawyers for a long time. That's
I know this one lawyer. I've known him for
Yeah,
a couple decades. Yeah.
it's a paper trail, and the truth is to support the efforts of the operator with regard to those calls and texts and phone and emails and letters even are all important. But recognizing, and maybe Terry, you can talk about this, the timing of that process of ultimately either determining abandonment or moving the property somewhere else because of the deference to the tenant that they may be suffering their own catastrophe as a result of this area problem. Any thoughts on managing that, Terry?
Well, my thoughts would have been to call you or call your state association and get some input from them. Because, where do you draw that line in the sand? What point is it? And, if you get rid of it and they were subject to those conditions you're talking about, will their tenant protection or I should say the customer goods, I'll get it right in a second, sale and disposal liability, would that cover that? So those are the things that I would have to ask up front before you, but at the same time, it's such a balancing act because if this stuff over here is about to sprout mold, you got to get it out of there. And if you can't get them, so where am I covered? Is my sale and disposal going to take care of it? Because I'm going to dispose of it under the circumstances. So I think there's a lot of question marks there on how that would be handled. And
well, I'll tell you, in response to that question mark, I hate to put it back on you, but many times I would recommend that they talk to the adjuster and the insurance company who carries their sale and disposal coverage as well as their customer goods legal liability coverage, and talk to them about the willingness to support the operator's decision of ultimate disposal, knowing that there is a risk that a claim may come, and working with your insurance company. And this, I guess, Stacy, this is true for the property casualty program that you guys offer. I assume you guys would want to work in partnership with the operator before they would make a decision that ultimately could expose the insurance company to liability, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say one of the things that sort of seems almost like a conflict here is that most of these policies, if the carrier has a sale and disposal, customer goods liability, if they have that, they typically are not going to have mold. Are they going to care if there's mold there? So are they more concerned about the sale and disposal liability exposure versus mold because they don't cover mold? So again, potential conflict there, I would have to really have to dig into and think about. And that's I'm going to have a conversation with one of our carriers now after this because I know these are what ifs, but we need to know the answer to that. And by the way, I've got two more things I want to pop back to in a second when we get a second.
Okay. So Stacy, walk me through a little bit though on, and it almost is a branch of what Terry was talking about, is exclusions under policies for tenant protection. And as you know, a tenant insurance with regard to sublimits on mold or no coverage on mold or mildew that may result as a result of a flood, but that there would be coverage for fire. I assume there would be coverage for maybe for hurricane and tornadoes. Tell us about the coverage realities that a tenant should be aware of, and therefore the operator should know about with regard to these programs.
Sure, absolutely. So I think operators really should consider the type of coverage that they're willing to offer to their tenants, and try to find a program that covers a very broad spectrum. There are some limitations, like with vermin, sometimes it only covers up to $500. There are limitations with mold mildew, it only covers up to $500 worth of damage. Generally fire, theft, wind damage, something tears the building apart, and then you've got falling water, that's always covered. If it's a roof leak or something like that, that's covered. Rising water, meaning flood, generally not covered. So, that's just something to pay attention to as a tenant or an operator, making sure that you're offering well-rounded coverage to your tenants. I think that's important.
That's an excellent point.
Terry, any thoughts? You were about to say you had some other
Yeah,
wanted
I
to add
just
some
wanted to
other
back up
thoughts on that.
just a little because a couple
Yeah,
of times we've mentioned the word adjuster. And I want to just mention a point about adjusters. You know, typically the adjuster with the company is going to call you. They're going to set up a time to come out. You know, and it depends. Was it a specific loss? Was it a regional loss? To how quickly they can get out there. But some people feel that they want to use a public adjuster. You know, the insurance agencies have, or the companies, carriers have their own adjusters. And some people feel that, okay, that adjuster works for that carrier. So they're going to work in the best benefit of that carrier, not for me. So sometimes they're tempted to work with a public adjuster. Now, I want to go on record, just in case there's a public adjuster on here. I don't think public adjusters are bad guys. Because you know a lot of times you use public adjusters if you as the owner and the carrier can't come to a price. Public adjusters can be used to be a referee, but a lot of times they're public adjusters that act like ambulance chasers. They will come in after a disaster like this, and they will come to you as the owner and say, hey, I can handle this, I can be the adjuster, or we'll get some prices set up. But you have to sign a contract with that public adjuster, and you typically are going to have the work done by whoever it is they say you do, which is, you know, maybe their brother-in-law, and they're going to make 15 to 30% of that claim. So just be very wary if there is a disaster where there's a lot of things going on that you could be called on by a public adjuster. The way that I have always been taught with public adjusters, if you go to them, there's probably no issue. If they come to you, don't do it. Call your insurance agency, call your company, because chances are you could be put in a position where you're ending up signing a contract with somebody that's going to take 30%, up to 30% of your claim, and you're going to have to take the work done by whoever they say you do. So that's a point about the adjusters.
Great advice. Great advice. I mean, and look, the reason I have you guys on with this is because you are industry veterans that are out there protecting the interests of storage operators in our industry. And I know that the operators can get good advice and good direction and honest direction from the two of you on these areas. So this input is really important, and you're trying to protect them. And
Yeah.
the thing I know we all feel so bad about is when these disasters happen with these operators, is guiding them through so they don't step in the legal landmine of signing a contract. And I want to get to this right now, signing a contract with somebody and then later realizing that they shouldn't have. So let's talk about those vendor agreements. And Stacy, that was one of the topics that you had raised about the concern of once the operator wants to start doing renovations or remediations to their project, how do they go about contracting for those services? Do they work through the insurance company? Can they independently do it upon the approval of the insurance company? So let's walk through that process. How do I fix my building? Terry?
Well, you're going to go through obviously the process with the adjuster and the claims and figuring out how much they're going to pay, but you're the one that you're allowed to work with whoever you want to. You can pick your own contractors, your own general contractors, your vendors, etc. But again, a word of advice there and a word of caution is, especially if it's a big disaster like a hurricane or a tornado or something that has a massive effect on a community or an area, you're going to have people coming in from out of town. These people that travel around in their trucks and they chase down storms and they want to come in and do some work and then they disappear and you never see them again. I mean, some of them may be perfectly fine, but I would try your best to get somebody local that has a good reputation to take care of it for you, who will be there to stand behind it when you have that roof leak a year from now.
Yeah, I would absolutely second that. Make sure that they're licensed, insured, bonded. They have indemnity clauses in their contract. What if they start a repair and it creates additional damage or injures somebody? They've got to have that liability in there. Definitely check all the fine print in the contract. Make sure that you're covering all these terms there for sure.
And making sure that, you know, when you are rebuilding, when you're doing the rebuild, make sure, obviously before it happens, that your policy has covered things like ordinance and law. Because if you get a building that's, let's say it's half destroyed, and it was built a long time ago, and the laws and the codes have changed since then, chances are you're going to be made to push the whole building down. So, and replace it. And you need to make sure it's got coverage to meet the new codes. There could be some new laws and codes and things in there that are going to make that building much more expensive than it would have been to begin with. I mean, it's going to be anyway because prices have gone up, but there are things you're going to have to build into it. Maybe it's fire codes, life safety codes, and things like that that did not exist at that time, which you want to make sure that you have those coverages built in.
Yeah,
to your policy.
that's a
Yeah,
good point, Terry. Those are additional coverages as opposed to just your, restoration and rebuilding coverage.
Yeah, I want to get back to the tenant process with the operator in a minute, but Terry, I can't help but add, just based upon what you said and what Stacy's now confirmed, is this program is another opportunity for an operator to rethink what coverages they have. And in this context, I want to address the need for builder's risk coverage while they are rebuilding. And therefore, if there's damage to their other structures or situations that arise from the renovation, they would have coverage, and that's not a typical coverage. Stacy mentioned that would be an additional coverage item for them to consider, as well as rethinking, and this is what I wanted to ask you both about, the issue of loss of use and the reality that a self-storage operator not only will lose the rent from the disaster point until the facility is cleared out of the existing tenants, but then during the rebuilding process and then the reletting or refilling, the lease up of the facility, there's going to be a long duration there. How is that dealt with in terms of an insurance coverage item? Either of you?
It's usually going to be the loss of income is going to be until it's rebuilt. It's not going to give you income to cover as you fill back up, because I actually had a customer bring a point to me the other day that I really hadn't thought about. And I'm like, this is a great point. He had a 650 unit facility, and he wanted to know, can I get just a check if this thing tornado just tears it down or it burns down? Can I get a check? And almost no carriers are willing to do that just to get a check. You've got to rebuild with something similar. Or there's potential moral issues there. So what they're looking for in his point, I'm getting to the point he was making, is I just want to check, because if I lose 650 tenants, there are no other tenants in my town to rent to. And everybody just lost all their stuff they needed to store. I may never fill up again. Great point. Great point. And we've had conversations with carriers about this. And they've got a good point, but we can't. We can do some sort of replacement, maybe a cash. There's potential things to do, but not what they really want, because I get their point, and there was not really a good way around it.
Yeah, that's an unfortunate situation for an owner too. Operator, you just have to bite the bullet, rebuild, and hope they come back. In that case, that's awful.
And that loss of income is usually a set amount of months as well to get it up and rebuilt.
It's based on averages of previous income.
So Stacy, let's talk about the tenants through this post-tenant protection insurance program. They're submitting their claims, they have their reimbursement. The operator either has to have them leave as a result of the damage, even if they have some remaining property that could be stored, typically would have to have them leave, maybe relocate to another operator facility, a neighboring facility. They want those customers back eventually, and that goes to the loss of use. Have you ever sort of counseled any of your customers with respect to the process of managing the emotion and the stress of moving out and maybe being a customer at some point going forward?
Yeah, sometimes as an operator, you can offer an incentive to come back. Maybe, when we are up and running, you'll get half off your first 6 months because this happened. And, as an operator, that's hard to swallow because you want to drum up as much income as you can because you're already down, having to use that loss of income coverage as well. But incentivizing your customers to come back, continuing to pay them for referrals if they send anybody your way as well is another good way to do it. We were lucky in being a larger management company that we had typically had sister stores nearby that we could send customers to rent there temporarily, and then they could come back because the other location was better for the customer to begin with. That's why they chose that location. But I think also as an operator, it's important to get to know your competition in the area and make friends with them, because you might be able to create some agreement that they will take your refugees, so to speak, and let them store there temporarily, and not be offended when they come back when the place is rebuilt, and maybe do some very short-term leases, like an agreement, we're just going to store here for 6 months or whatever it is. So just not fighting over those customers because of this disaster that happened. Being friends with your competition is really important.
So let me wrap up before we get to some questions on just sort of the legal takeaways from this as well. I mean, you guys have given incredible operational guidance and process guidance for the listeners, which I think is so helpful. I think one of the things we always should start with and remember is the lease agreement and the risk that things could happen at self-storage facilities. And because self-storage operators are not bailors of the property, they don't take care of custody and control. The shifting of the risk of loss to the tenant is the key of what we're talking about, that the tenant assumes the responsibility. As odd as this sounds, if there is a plane that drops on a building, that is, as crazy as it sounds, is a tenant risk, as well as the risk of tornadoes or earthquakes or fires. They need to insure themselves to protect that risk because the burden is shifted to them. And the contract should have limited liability provisions with regard to insurance, as also valuations, to protect the operator. So hopefully everyone's doing that and then working towards the what ifs if things happen, as both Terry and Stacy have talked about. So I know there's some questions out there. We want to save the last few minutes for answering those questions. So hit us with your question.
There are a couple of them. The first one is, what is the most common question that you are asked?
With regard to disasters?
Disasters and rebuilding, and what to do with the insurance, contacting the tenants. What's the most common question that you are asked?
Well, I'll take a turn at it. The one that I get the most is what I think we've already sort of touched on, is when is enough time passed to remove and dispose of property that you cannot reach a tenant and their property is damaged or destroyed, and you just, as Stacey said, you still feel bad about removing and disposing of it, but the tenant has not communicated with you, notwithstanding all of your efforts. What is that point? As your building may be suffering some mold concerns because of water, or other hazardous materials based upon fire, something eventually has to be done. I will say that an operator, landlord, self-storage operator ultimately has the right to repair, remediate its building, notwithstanding the interference by failure to act of a tenant. So one tenant cannot stop a rebuilding of a facility. And an operator at some point, once they've lined up their adjuster on value and pricing, there are contractors for renovation and remediation, they just have to go ahead and do their work. This is where the limitation of value will come in with a later tenant claim for damage or destruction of their property, as well as the sale and disposal coverage that Terry talked about. So it all fits together, but that's the most common question. Mm-hmm. Do you guys want to take your shot at what?
Yeah, we'd like to hear from each of you.
Yeah.
Let's see, most common question, probably what all is covered. With tenant protection, they want to know what is covered. So just kind of going down that list and explaining this is covered, but only to a limit. This is covered, this is covered, this is covered, that's not covered. Yeah, what is covered is the most common question that I get. And then also maybe from an operator, how much money can I make from it? That's also the other big question. Yeah.
I'm lucky enough to say that after just a little over a year, we haven't had a disaster. We did have one that had a little bit of tornado damage, and his only question was, how much is my out-of-pocket cost on this?
Well, we have one more question, and this would be for everyone too. Looking back at your experience with disasters and self-storage facilities, what's the most important lesson that you've learned and you wish that all owners and operators knew?
Well, I can answer
Yeah,
that.
go ahead.
For me.
Yeah.
That is having a backup of all of your information offsite. Because when disaster strikes, you don't know where the fire is going to move to. You don't, I mean, if it's a flood, everything is affected. Um, I think having a plan beforehand and having a backup of all your information offsite is the most important thing you can do. And just trying to stay ahead of the what if. You can't live in fear, but you have to prepare for, what could happen. I think that's the most important thing is preparedness, maybe.
Terry?
Well, I'm going to say that as I don't really have anything to add to that, but I'd like to take this minute to say something I've gotten very passionate about when it comes to potential disasters, if that's okay. Flood insurance. Okay. Being in North Carolina, I'm extremely sensitive to floods now. I mean, Western North Carolina, pretty much nobody on this thing should not be aware of what happened almost a year ago in Western North Carolina. I read something this week that said of all that devastation that happened, less than 40% of the people had any flood insurance. And the reason was that most of them were not in flood zones. And where I live in central North Carolina, a few weeks ago, Tropical Storm Chantel, if you guys remember it, it kind of came up through Florida, but it came and it sat right over our town. It's like, hey, there's Terry. We like to follow him around. And it sat there. Same thing happened to me in Wilmington with Florence. That's why I say that. But it sat there for 12 hours. We got 10.3 inches of rain in 12 hours here. And this is after we've had a pretty wet spring. There were places that never, ever would be on a flood map that have flooded, washed away, damage unbelievable. Our town's water source, luckily for me, I'm on a well, but our town's water source, there were thousands of people that for a week had no water. So my point is that if it doesn't matter if your location is in a flood map or in a flood zone on a map. If you look at FEMA's map and you're not in a flood zone, that doesn't mean anything. There's a saying in the industry, if it rains where you are, you're in a flood zone. And a lot of people have proven that, unfortunately, over the past year. So I always, if you are in a flood zone, you're not going to have much of a choice. You're going to be forced to, if you've got a bank, to get flood insurance. But I'm going to tell you, if you're either you don't have a bank that's financing it, or if you're not in a flood zone, if you're not in a flood zone, it's going to be cheap to get. That 60% in Western North Carolina, if they would have gotten it and it would have been cheap, they wouldn't have lost everything they had. So I just wanted to take a second and jump on that soapbox to mention that since we're talking about disasters, that's a terrible one. That's a terrible one. I mean, they're all terrible, but that one could potentially be paid for, so to speak, or at least offset. So that's what I wanted to add, if that's okay.
And Terry, I think that's really the theme of how we finished today is the recognition that so many of the operators that we know have suffered from these natural disasters. And it's one thing to handle the one-off unit claim, which seems simple, but when these catastrophic matters happen and operators need to have a resource like Stacy's talking about in terms of a disaster plan, comfort with their insurance companies, like you mentioned with Terry, with the comfort of being able to make that phone call. I think the theme that I wanted to finish with was the recognition that it could happen to any of us. And we need to assume that as part of our business practices that it could happen. So the offsite storage of materials, the listing of who to call when something happens, and the planning ahead of time as to what you need to do when it happens. And having, look, from my point, executed leases, do a lease audit now. Don't wait until after it happens to make sure you have signed leases and you have contact information for all your tenants. Know who your tenants are, how to reach them. Think as if, I hate to say this, think as if that it could happen to you, but you'll appreciate the fact that you've prepared in advance when or if it happens. So I hope that's lessons for everybody to be thinking about.
Yeah.
Boy, they got some great information today, guys. Thanks for participating.
I know that was excellent information, and I'm going to now share my screen and give you the two can you hopefully you guys can see um
Not yet. Oh, there you
There
go.
it is.
there
There
we
it
go.
is.
There it is.
Okay, sorry, it takes a second. Stacy was kind enough. She talked about the self-storage disaster quick reference guide. You're going to want to scan the QR code, and then you'll be able to download. It has immediate action steps, key contacts lists, post-event claim log, and legal risk quick notes. Is there anything else, Stacy, you wanted to mention about that?
No, I just think it's a good starting point. It's uh, you probably as an operator may want to add more to it. You may have, more things, more contacts. You may have vendors that you've already contracted with for, different rate for HVAC or whatever. Feel free to add to this. This is not the end all be all disaster guide. It's just a good starting point, and some things to consider. And make sure you keep a copy of this in the cloud somewhere so that you can
Yeah.
get a hold of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. With your disaster plan. Yep. And then the second thing we wanted to give, there we go. This is something that the storage group does in conjunction with Scott and Carlos. And this is Storage Lease Now. And it's a website where you can go. If you don't have a lease, you're looking for it, it's by state. If you ask a friend that operates in Texas, if they have a lease in Florida, you're not going to want to do that because you want to make sure that you have everything you need for your state. And this is a really quick, good way to be able to get those state leases. So they're affordable. You upload your name and your logo. You can instantly download. It's created by lawyers who specialize in self-storage. And we're offering a webinar discount. You can scan this QR code with your phone. It'll take you to the website. You have to select your state. And then during the payment process, there's a place where you can type in a promo code, and it's webinar, lowercase 25, and you'll get $25 off your first lease. And that's just as a thank you, along with the disaster guide for attending. We appreciate your time. Panel, there was so much good information. Thank you all for sharing your expertise so willingly. We appreciate it. And we hope everybody has a great rest of the week. Everybody be safe. And thanks once again. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.